the whole notion of logic, the whole notion of logic.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
What is this nothing you talk about?
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
The whole notion of logic, the whole notion of logic.
Welcome to TR News, your home for transnational rationale. Join today's trek through the stars, illuminated from the proverbial oil of a blessed olive tree, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Truth guides its purveyors to the light, and truth derived from reason is omniscient. I'm your telepathic rhetorician, TR. And this is today's World News. Today's first story deals with the failed drone attack against Iran. We're considering that Israel may have been involved, and fault lines by way of Sputnik and Manila Chan had a conversation with Mohammed Marandi about this issue.
You know, this gets into something very complicated, seeing as it sounds like Iran has acknowledged that this is coming from the Israelis. There are reports that I'm seeing is that the drones were launched out of neighboring Azerbaijan. Now, the Azeris are, from what I understand, the largest minority group within Iran's borders. So that...
Yeah, so this idea that, firstly, and, you know, I can maybe... summarize what she's implying here and what she's saying directly. This idea that Azerbaijan is a separate place with entirely separate ideas may not be entirely factual. Azeris compose around 16% of the overall population of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So 16%, that's a significant minority. And the northeastern border of Iran links with Azerbaijan and touches Azerbaijan. So this idea that they're entirely separate nations is faulty in a lot of ways, and we'll go on here. Morandi himself, the guest that Manila Chan and Jamal Thomas and Malik Abdul have on the show this day, Morandi himself is Azeri. Not only that, the religious leader of Iran, Khomeini, is also Azeri. So this idea that Azerbaijan is completely separate from Iran is not such a salient or a poignant idea. Let's go on.
That complicates it one way. And the other complication would be that we know the Azeris have been on again, off again, fighting with the Armenians for Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, we know Russia is more friendly with Armenia. Turkey is friendly with Azerbaijan.
Again, so here we have it. I may not go any further here because this is the part of Manila Chan's ideas that really spawned this story, right? This idea that Russia is more friendly with Armenia. The first thing that I thought of when I heard this was that maybe a few days before this, I came across an article that had the implications of Russia and Armenia not getting along. So let's look at that as we consider how Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, as well as Iran, and some other players in the West Asian region, interact with one another. So this article is from Al Jazeera, and the title of it is Russia Blames Armenia for the Breakdown of Azerbaijan Peace Talks. So it says, over the past few months, Russia and Armenia's relationship has become fraught with tension over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. And here we have a picture of the Azerbaijani president, Ilham Aliyev, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the Armenian president, Nikol Pashinyan. And they've met repeatedly since 2020. The Nagorno-Karabakh War, which was decisive in controlling a specific area of what we may call Azerbaijan now, entitled the Lachin Corridor, is really important here. That there's language in it that delineates who interacts with who and who is allowed to pass through this corridor, who is securing the area, what the roles of Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan are respectively. So this was a tripartite treaty. We'll take a look at some of the language in just a moment. So Russia's blamed Armenia for a breakdown in peace talks with Azerbaijan. And this is again over that disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. For months, Armenia and Azerbaijan, both former Soviet republics, have tried to discuss a peace deal for the contested region in the South Caucasus. Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but it's home to mainly ethnic Armenian population. The two neighbors' conflict over the region began at the start of the 20th century and has broken out into war twice, the latest in 2020. Moscow on Thursday accused, and this is last Thursday, accused Armenia of bailing on peace talks, right? So again, we go back to Manila Chan and this idea that Armenia and Russia are allies, are aligned in this dispute or in this conflict. I mean, there's new information on that. So, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said it's difficult to assess Yerevan's position when their official statements differ so significantly. She said Armenia's decision to abandon peace talks scheduled in December in Moscow prevented us from discussing the peace treaty. So it goes a little further here to unpack the tensions. And yeah, we'll get into this part. This is for the past month, it says, Azerbaijani civilians who say they're environmental activists have protested against or along the Lachin Corridor, the only road linking Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. Yerevan has called the action an Azerbaijani government-endorsed blockade. Yeah, and in the future, this is the first episode, and each story really spawns 2 or 3 other stories. So I think in the future there will be a story on the legitimacy of the environmental activists from Azerbaijan. Baku says the group has legitimate concerns over suspected unlawful Armenian mining projects and has denied the region is blocked. Yep, and Baku is the Azerbaijani governmental home. And the issue has caused tension in the relationship between allies, Armenia, and Russia. Yerevan has repeatedly criticized Russia's peacekeepers who have been placed at the Lachin Corridor since 2020 to ensure free movement. Armenia has said they're not doing enough to ease the bottleneck, but Moscow has said it's doing everything possible. On Tuesday, Armenian President Minister Nikol Pashinyan said Russia's military presence in Armenia not only fails to guarantee its security, but it raises security threats for Armenia. And on the same day, Armenia announced it would not host military drills by the Russian-led alliance of post-Soviet states. And Pashinyan said it'd be unreasonable to hold these the treaty organization's exercises on the territory of Armenia. And then it goes further to say that they're still allies despite the canceled drills. So not only do we have a discrepancy between what Armenia is saying on the ground and what they're doing, but we also have a discrepancy between whether or not Russia and Armenia are as aligned as they are. And then to add to that, there have been drills that have been canceled, Russian drills inside of Armenia. Yeah, so that story and that idea, particularly the concept of the language within the treaty, right, and how that dictates what it is that each country that is a part of the treaty does in the Lachin Corridor area. And so that's one of our articles. Then there's another one here that I saw. This is the Armenian press. The first was from Al Jazeera. This is from armenpress.am. Russia says ready to host Armenia-Azerbaijan foreign ministerial negotiations. So Russia is affirming its readiness to organize. Let's make sure this is legible. Here in Yerevan, this is the governmental home of Armenia. Russia is affirming its readiness to organize negotiations between the Armenian and Azerbaijani foreign ministers in Moscow under the auspices of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson. Maria Zakharova said at a press briefing, "We've notified both Yerevan and Baku about this. We've publicly spoken about this. We consider that the periodically emerging difficulties on the ground should not become obstacles or pretexts for freezing the negotiations process, and it's necessary to resume the work in all directions of the normalization of the Armenian-Azerbaijani relations as soon as possible, including the unblocking of transport routes, border delimitation, and signing of peace treaty, as well as contacts between the civil societies." So what jumps out at me here is this unblocking of transport routes, right? That they mention that first. And so what I did was I took a look at the language within the treaty itself to see who was responsible for that unblocking of the transport routes. And before we do that, though, I want to look at one more Armenian press article. Russia calls for complete unblocking of the Lachin corridor. The Russian Ministry of Defense, the command of the Russian peacekeeping contingent, in cooperation with the Russian Foreign Ministry, are maintaining permanent contact with all stakeholders, parties, and active efforts for resolving the situation in the Lachin corridor. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said at a press briefing, "Unlike the majority of the foreign players who are limited to statements and calls to de-escalation, the Russian side searching for real solutions on the ground is providing humanitarian aid. Thus, we call for a complete unblocking of the Lachin corridor in accordance with the 9 November 2020 statement of the leaders of Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and we call on Baku and Yerevan to demonstrate political will for swift resolution of existing disputes." Yeah, so again, this language about unblocking of the Lachin corridor, and particularly this 9 November statement, right? So this is the Armenian side, right? And so one may ask, oh, well, what is the Azerbaijani opinion on this situation? How do they see it? Well, if we go to, let's see, this is Azi Media. This is a really extensive article. It's I wouldn't say that it's unbiased, but there are some really important ideas within this, right? And so the subheading of it is that while Azerbaijan gets most of the blame for the ongoing crisis in the Lachin corridor, the international community does not see the elephant in the room. Armenia's shipment of weapons and illegal mining operations through this corridor is intended for civilian use. So, as part of the trilateral declaration signed by Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia on 10 November 2020, it was agreed in Article 6 that the Lachin corridor, 5 kilometers wide, which will provide a connection between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia while not passing through the territory of Shusha. It's a civilian city in Azerbaijan, shall remain under the control of the Russian Federation peacemaking forces. It further says that the Republic of Azerbaijan shall guarantee the security of persons, vehicles, and cargo moving along the Lachin corridor in both directions. So this is language from point 6 of the treaty, of the tripartite treaty. And this article goes on to unpack the ways that Armenia has been interacting with Russia to move things, such as military supplies through the Lachin corridor, right? And so, going back to Manila Chan and this story about how possibly how it's possible that the Iranian drone attack began in Azerbaijan. I think this is super important, to think about in relation to the traffic, who's allowing what, and how that's affecting the other side of the Lachin corridor, right, which includes Azerbaijan and Iran as well. So this provision, Azerbaijan granted a special entry and exit regime to the Armenian citizens, vehicles, cargo through an 80-kilometer road inside Azerbaijan, the Lachin corridor, to its Karabakh region, populated by the majority of ethnic Armenians. As the road temporarily remains under the control, quote-unquote control, zoom in here, remains under the control of a Russian peacekeeping force, Azerbaijan's army, police, customs, and other agencies do not check the persons and cargo yet. The Russian peacekeeping force supposedly exercises this function on behalf of Azerbaijan. So the eco-activists are mentioned here again, and how they are attempting to limit mining within the Lachin corridor. And it also says here, the debate stems from a misinterpretation of the purposes of the Lachin corridor, that the corridor is temporary visa and custom-free entry to Azerbaijan for Armenian citizens, vehicles, and cargo into the Karabakh region. So the Karabakh region is in Azerbaijan, but it's predominantly Armenian, and so the idea was that the Lachin corridor was to allow citizens and vehicles and cargo, and not necessarily military supplies. So yeah, it goes on to say, importantly, this temporary visa-free regime does not grant Armenia the right to ship weapons, soldiers, and military supplies in disguise to its remaining army units in Karabakh, which remains an overlooked factor in media coverage. So yeah, this article goes on to unpack a solution just rooted in that certain portion of point 6 of the treaty. So the impact of this unfortunate situation on the civilians in Karabakh is notable. To make progress from the current impasse, a balance must be struck between security and humanitarian considerations. So in this context, for instance, the parties can learn from the negotiations regarding the so-called Brexit withdrawal agreements, which ensure the non-intrusive entry and exit customs regime in Northern Ireland. So comparing it to the situation with Britain and Northern Ireland, and supplies back and forth. Currently, there are numerous posts or checkpoints alongside the Lachin corridor, controlled by the Russian peacekeeping force. However, they don't function as expected, considering that weapons and other illicit transportation have been moving across the corridor in the time that it's been under their control. Azerbaijan apparently doesn't trust the reliability and effectiveness of the existing posts. So yeah, we have that, and again, we'll take a quick look at the language from the treaty itself, particularly point 6, third paragraph, that the Republic of Azerbaijan shall guarantee the security of persons, vehicles, and cargo moving along the Lachin corridor in both directions. Right, so essentially, Azerbaijan's and some Azerbaijanis think that following this portion of the treaty will rectify the situation in its entirety. I'm not exactly sure about that, but what I do know is that enacting something like that may eliminate attacks like this.
This mobile phone video was aired on Iran's state TV, claiming to show a drone hitting an Iranian military factory in Isfahan on Saturday night. Iran's
So there we have it. And even beyond that, I want to go a little further into the Rumble commentary, because Marandi makes some great points, and also I think Manila Chan adds a few more things to her question here. So let's listen up here.
How do all of these outside big players play into this situation?
Well, I think when it comes to the Republic of Azerbaijan, two things I think should first be mentioned. One is that I don't know of any information that any drones came from Azerbaijan on this occasion. I doubt that, I would imagine that actually these particular drones, and I may be wrong, but they were launched from inside Iran. As I said, using terror groups that are based in northern Iraq. That's my guess. I'm not saying that this is fact. I don't have any confidential information on this, or any inside information on this. When it comes to Azerbaijan, my family name is Marandi, which means a person from Marand, and that is an Azeri city in Iran. Or the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Khamenei, he is from Khamenei, that's the meaning of his family name. Khamenei is an Azeri city. He is very fluent in Azeri. Azeris in Iran are very much part of Iranian society. And the country that fears the Azeri population is probably the Republic of Azerbaijan, because they're afraid that religious identity in Azerbaijan may grow. And remember, Azerbaijan was a part of the Soviet Union. It was always secular, and people were taught to be secular. And religious sentiments in Azerbaijan have grown over the last few decades, and they are Shia. So the government in Azerbaijan has constantly cracks down on religious festivals, religious gatherings, and that sort of thing in Baku and in other cities. But I don't think that in this particular case we're talking about any Azerbaijani involvement. I think that most probably the Israeli regime used its proxies that are funded by the West. These groups in northern Iraq, they're funded by NATO countries, they're funded by Saudi Arabia.
Yes, so this is sailing to the point that Morandi and Khomeini, the leader of Iran, is from Azerbaijan. And we think about this relationship between these countries and their people. This idea that, for example, a place like Kosovo is 90-something% Albanian, and again that Azerbaijan 16%, 16% Azeri. Not only that, but another statistic that I came across was that the Republic of Iran has 3 times the population of Azeris as Azerbaijan does. And so the number of Azerbaijanis, or Azeris, the number of Azeris in Iran is 3 times that of those in Azerbaijan. So in a sense, of course, Azerbaijan or Azeris are not the majority, but there's more of them. They have more of a presence in the borders of Iran. So we'll continue to unpack this story, to keep our eye on it here at TR News. And at this point, let's see. Let's just take just a moment to load up our next story.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
So, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House, recently was cheered on by his Democratic colleagues as the vote for the House leader was in flux due to some defecting Republicans. The vote itself, it happened multiple times. Eventually, Hakeem Jeffries was not nominated, of course, because the Republicans do have a majority in the House. So, just thinking about where we might be if he was the leader of the House, and to go even further, to think about his relationship to Israel, to Zionists, and particularly to Palestine. So in a statement by Representative Jeffries in connection with the Amnesty International report on Israel, Hakeem Jeffries made the statement that Israel is a democracy. It's not an apartheid state. Let's pause right there. I think I have a problem with that. The idea that, and I'm not going to go beyond what I should say here, and more particularly, I'll do some reading by UN.org. And let's just highlight this term apartheid here as well. So, calling on the international community to accept and adopt the recent findings in his report, an independent human rights expert said on Friday that apartheid is being practiced by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. This is 25 March 2022. Human Rights Organization, as part of the UN. UN Special Rapporteur's report echoes recent findings by Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights organizations who analyzed Israel's 55-year occupation of the Palestinian territory, right? So I'm sure we'll come back to this, but this idea that Israel is not an apartheid state, right, is just not backed by the UN. So any conclusion to the contrary is demonstrably false, he says, dangerous and designated to isolate Israel in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the world. The special relationship between the U.S. and Israel is anchored in our shared democratic values and geopolitical interests. Before going on, this idea, this toughest neighborhoods in the world. Sure, our last story was about the neighborhood, the West Asian area that includes Israel. And you know, from here on, I may be referring to Israel as apartheid Palestine or mandatory Palestine. I think that might be a little bit more accurate. The special relationship between the U.S. and Israel is anchored in our shared democratic values and geopolitical interests. And that's probably the most honest thing, especially the geopolitical interest portion, right? Democratic values, it might be an overstatement. Depends on what you consider democratic values. I strongly support the special relationship and look forward to redoubling efforts in the region to bring about a lasting two-state solution. And, you know, maybe we'll unpack that as well, this idea of the two-state solution and who supports a two-state solution. In watching numerous Israel news outlets, as well as people who are on the ground in Israel that are in support of Israel, mandatory Palestine, I have seen that they are not in support of the two-state solution, that they are in support, they've done away with the idea of the two-state solution. And so this is the only people that speak about the two-state solution are U.S. politicians. So there is Hakeem Jeffries' ideas about Israel, about Zionism. And the question is, you know, like, what impact does that have on him as a person? How does that sit with him, you know, honestly? And not only him, but his family, his relatives. You know, what would let's say his grandfather say about this? You know, what would his immediate family say about this idea that not only is he a staunch supporter of Israel as a leader of the Democratic House, but he also has received tremendous amounts of money from them. Let's take a look at Hakeem Jeffries and his federal congressional candidacy and where the money came from that he used to run his campaign. Well, look at the top contributor there. Pro-Israel America PAC. Pro-Israel America PAC is the top contributor. So, just thinking about that, in the context of support for Israel, and then, of course, the idea of a PAC, right? This is dark money. This is legalized dark money. We can talk further about that in other episodes as well. This concept of a pack. Yep, and that's at opensecrets.org. You can check that out. Yep, and so the wondering is, how does this sit with, him? Honestly, money aside, you're thinking about ethics and righteousness, right? Well, it just so happens that his grandfather has some very, very staunch opinions on Israel. So, Dr. Jeffries, and I located this archive. There is a particular portion of this that is really illuminating. But the title of this is Dr. Jeffries and the Anti-Semitic Branch of the Afrocentrism Movement. And this concept of anti-Semitism is also something that we can unpack very soon. But let's see here. Dr. Leonard Jeffries and the Anti-Semitic Branch of the Afrocentrism Movement. Yeah, particularly Jeffries is staunchly anti-Zionist. Now, we conflate Zionism with Semitism. I don't see how Semites are, Ilhan Omar is a Semite, right? But this idea that Hakeem Jeffries' grandfather was anti-Zionist, right? Categorized as anti-Semitic, which is faulty categorization. And particularly, there's some ideas that Dr. Jeffries had that I'd like to highlight here. Just a moment, let me find this portion. Okay, so found it. Dr. Jeffries, the Jews and critics of his brand of Afrocentrism. Dr. Jeffries, along with many others, believes that education has for too long been Eurocentric, meaning that it's taught the history of the world as a European history and through European eyes, to the neglect of other experiences. This sounds a lot like critical race theory, particularly the propagation of non-European American history. So rather than trying to include other perspectives as part of a more complete educational framework, Dr. Jeffries preaches the supremacy of African history, just as he preaches the biological supremacy of people of color over. And the language in this article is problematic in so many ways. This is the reason why I scrolled through it and wanted some particular things from it. But again, that portion about pushing back against blanket Eurocentricity is, in a sense, related to Ron DeSantis's recent issues with critical race theory and the validity of so-called African American history in education. Yep. So as we consider that, I think maybe we should begin to talk about what Leonard Jeffries, the grandfather of Hakeem Jeffries, would say to his grandson, with his blanket support for Israel and particularly for Zionism. So yes, that's our all access segment. And at this point, let's move to another section. In fact, just a moment, I'm going to load up here.
Today's unemployment figures show the economy is moving in the right direction. The drop in unemployment is one more sign that the economy is strengthening.
Revenge of the Cis. Revenge of the Cis is I think these guys are, and from my perspective, from my vantage point, these vloggers, they're artists. They do follow trends, and so one might say that they're gullible in that sense, that they latch on to pop culture to permeate within their sphere, their concepts, their ideas, and with that, they have a lot of takes that are they're enlightening. So let's just take a listen to what Royce from Revenge of the Cis thinks about Ilhan Omar, Minnesota's representative in Congress.
The other thing with her not understanding the word is what she's implying is that, so again, social media is terrorism if you don't like what you say, so we need to censor it.
As has Representative Omar.
By the way, here you go. You guys are gonna be pissed. Some people are gonna be pissed at this, especially some of the boomers on Rumble. Ilhan Omar's 100% right about Israel.
Oh,
Yes.
fucking 110.
She's 100.
So there we have it. These now, if you know of Revenge of the Sis, their fan base may be moving towards being in support of what Royce just stated, but that would be a serious shift, a serious tide change, if the general follower of Revenge of the Sis found truth in Ilhan Omar, right? I mean, there's some sects of the world who back Ilhan Omar 110%. For example, everyone at the World Cup. But there are also a significant contingent of people who are evangelical or who just shut off to politics and are indoctrinated by the lies that the media propagates here, throughout the world. So this concept of Ilhan Omar being right about the apartheid state of Israel and being right about Benjamin Netanyahu, aka Netanyahu, this concept that Ilhan Omar is correct, and just recently she was removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee as if a Somalian refugee who was displaced by U.S.-backed military outfits in Somalia how can we not imagine that she doesn't have something pertinent to say? I mean, she could give us a perspective on what's happening in that area, and this is not far from Yemen. This is not far from Iraq. This is not far from Iran, right? So considering those ideas, let's take a listen to the House floor on the day that Ilhan Omar was removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee, which was just maybe 2 days ago that it became official. Let's see here.
Five and a quarter minutes. I yield to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Representative Omar, to close. The gentlewoman.
Before we listen to Omar, let's check out Rashida Tlaib, who spoke just before her.
The gentlewoman from Michigan, Representative Tlaib.
The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Desperation. So desperate to distract the American people from their total inability to govern. The GOP is now doing what it is best at, weaponizing hate against a black, beautiful Muslim woman. Congresswoman Omar's lived experience as a refugee and a child of survivor of war should be welcomed on this committee. It is needed.
And just to be clear, Rashida Tlaib, you know, although she does have a Michigan Midwestern mom accent, I guess she learned English that way. She is from Palestine. She's Palestinian American. So her vantage point is you know, Islamic in that sense, and it's also connected to mandatory Palestine.
Needed. When you can't pass any bills that actually improve the people's lives, they turn to Congress. They turn Congress into a place of fear-mongering hate. It is so painful to watch. How ironic that the so-called lovers of personal freedom are now moving to censor Congresswoman Omar in the same week they introduced a bill to ban federal employees from engaging in censorship. Where are the free speech warriors today? The hypocrisy is obvious to the American people. You are showing who you all are, really.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Omar will not be silenced.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
To Congresswoman Omar, I am so sorry,
has
sis,
expired.
that our country is failing you today through this chamber. You belong
The gentlewoman is no longer recognized, and the gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
How much time do I have?
5.25 minutes.
I yield to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Representative Omar, to close.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Yeah, and you know, okay, so firstly, yes, Tlaib and the passion that she spoke with, you know, was due to her circumstances as a human being, right? So this representation is needed, especially to counter the anti-Islamic sentiments. And again, we'll continue to unpack this term anti-Semitism as it should if it is defined in the way that the IHRA defines it, as broadly including all Israelis and all Jewish people. In the same breath, Muslims are Semites as well. So Rashida Tlaib is a Semite. Ilhan Omar is a Semite. And any anti-Ilhan Omar-ness, any anti-Rashida Tlaib-ness is anti-Semitism in a sense. So let's hear from Ilhan Omar. The other portion of this that I really, you know, I wanted to end with this because I think it's super important to hear her voice as she is, as there is an organized attempt to silence her, to silence an elected representative. Yeah, Minnesota spoke. You know, Minnesota is forward-thinking in its election of Muslim people into Congress. So I applaud Minnesota for that, and I also applaud Ilhan Omar for her statement here.
This debate today, it's about who gets to be an American. What opinions do we have to be counted as Americans? This is what this debate is about, Madam Speaker. There is this idea that you are a suspect if you are an immigrant, or if you are from certain parts of the world, or a certain skin tone, or a Muslim. It is no accident that members of the Republican Party accused the first black president, Barack Obama, of being a secret Muslim.
This is the reason why she is in office. Because of the vitriol that Barack Hussein Obama was met with in becoming the president. And what she doesn't one of those issues, recent issues that she doesn't mention is the Muslim ban. So there have been numerous political organizings that have been anti-Islamic, and Ilhan Omar is bearing the brunt of that as a representative here. So she mentions a couple of others as well.
It is no accident that former President Donald Trump led a birther movement that falsely claimed he was born in Kenya.
Yes, and this person may still be running for president. This person most likely won because of, if not particularly that idea, ideas that were as vitriolic as that. So essentially, we have anti-Islam being the discrimination of the day, and also a signifier of pushing back against Democrats, against so-called African Americans, blacks, against Muslims in general.
Because to them, falsely labeling the first and only president of the United States of America a Muslim and African immigrant somehow made him less American. Well, I am Muslim. I am an immigrant, and interestingly, from Africa. Is anyone surprised that I am being targeted? Is anyone surprised that I am somehow deemed unworthy to speak about American foreign policy? Or that they see me as a powerful voice that needs to be silenced? Frankly, it is expected, because when you push power, power pushes back. Representation matters. Continuing to expand our ideas of who is American and who can partake in the American experiment is a good thing. I am an American who was sent here, by her constituents to represent them in Congress, a refugee who survived the horrors of a civil war, someone who spent her childhood in a refugee camp, someone who knows what it means to have a shot at a better life here in the United States, and someone who believes in the American dream and the American possibility and the promise and the ability to participate in the democratic process. That is what this debate is about. There is an idea out there that I do not have objective decision making because of who I am, where I come from, and my perspective. But I reject that. We say there is nothing objective about policy making. We all inject our perspective, our point of views, our lived experiences, and the voices of our constituents. That's what democracy is about. So what is the work of the Foreign Affairs Committee? It is not to co-sign the stated foreign policy of whatever administration is in power. It's about oversight. It's to critique and to advocate for a better path forward. But most importantly, it is to make the myth that American foreign policy is intrinsically moral a reality. So I will continue to speak up, because representation matters. I will continue to speak up for little kids who wonder who's speaking up for them. I will continue to speak up for families around the world who are seeking justice, whether they are displaced in refugee camps or they are hiding under their beds somewhere like I was, waiting for the bullets to stop. Because this child, survivor of war, would have wanted that. The 9-year-old me would be disappointed if I didn't talk about the victims of conflict, those that are experiencing unjust wars, atrocities, ethnic cleansing, occupation, or displacement like I did.
Yeah, and that's the big elephant in the room, is that her upbringing, her rearing, was a product of U.S. expansionism and colonialism. So if we really want an honest and complete perspective, of course we're going to have people who are pro-expansion, pro-colonialism, pro what happened in Somalia. But it's really important to have people like Ilhan Omar representing the United States. And above and beyond all of that, her opinion, I would argue, is closer to that of her constituents and of people in the United States and people in the world, more so than those who removed her from the committee. There's not one person that I've met in the past few months. There's not one person that I've met that is in my age group that is has some types of demographic similarities to me. There's not one person that I met that said that they are pro-war, that they support what's happening in the Ukraine, that they are okay with the fact that that the U.S. government never declares war, but is always engaged in it. Right? And I would like to look back at the Somalian conflict, and maybe if something about that comes up in future news, then we can take a deep dive into that history. But let's listen to these last few, and then we're going to beam up out of here.
They are looking to the international community and the United States, asking for help. They look to us because the international community and the United States profess the values of protecting human rights and upholding international law. So we owe it to them not to make this a myth, but a reality. I didn't come to Congress to be silent. I came to Congress to be their voice. And my leadership and voice will not be diminished if I am not on this committee for one term. My voice will get louder and stronger, and my leadership will be celebrated around the world as it has been. So take your vote or not. I am here to stay, and I am here to be a voice against harms around the world and advocate for a better world. I yield back.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up, quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.